Canary by Cloud9 and 3/4. Chapter 32. A Promise Fulfilled. Shinso was released from the hospital that evening, just like Jiro had predicted. Well, his parents didn't know that. They thought he was to stay at the hospital for at least a day longer, so they could keep an eye on him. But that was a lie he fed to them so shamelessly. He'd gotten up from his hospital bed, done his hair, and took nothing but his phone and his wallet. Everything else had been sent home anyway. He checked the phone. No messages from Midoriya, of course. Perhaps his phone was broken. Stolen. Lost somewhere back in the forest he was taken from. However, despite his absence, the group chat remained active. Aria in the aviary. Dove. Are we really all doing this? Owl. Looks like it. Dove. I still don't know if this is a good idea.
Crane. And I completely agree. But I am also aware that there is no way for me to stop you. So I shall resort to joining you, in the hopes that I can make you back out as soon as it inevitably goes wrong.
Raven. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em. Puffin. A wise notion. Raven. I can never tell if you're being serious or not. That was why when he marched out of the hospital seeing his group of friends there alongside Kirishima and Yaoyorozu, there was a smile on his face. He grinned like everything was going to be okay. Like he was oblivious to the dangers of the situation at hand, or perhaps lying without remorse. Either way, his grin made the others smile too, and that was all that really mattered. Okay, let's do this. Acted straight up villainous during the sports festival, and many have observed Bakugo seeming rather displeased with his victory. How do we know that if the League of Villains really are trying to recruit him, that he won't join their ranks?
Bakugo ground his teeth. All the villains were there now. That stupid vampire girl was still drooped over Deku.
But he was more focused on the press conference than he was on her. His eyes flickered over to Bakugo when those words were uttered, though. Don't you dare insult my friend! He spent his whole life being called a villain, whilst you were called the hero! Well, you know what? They got it the wrong way around! There was a horrible sinking feeling in his stomach. Something he'd never really felt before. He hated it. Was he really like that? Villain? Deku was right. For most of his life, he had been called a hero. That was all he ever saw in his future. It was to be one of glory and undeniable victory. He had the power and the grades, the drive and the strength. He would be a hero. The greatest of them all. But now, I take full responsibility for Bakugo's behavior. Bakugo blinked, focusing back on the television screen. Mr. Aizawa was there, bowing before the camera and the reporter who had said those harsh words. However, his actions at the sports festival proved the exact opposite of what you were implying. His teacher continued, his face seemingly emotionless, but Bakugo could see an anger in his eyes, something only those who knew him well could really find. With his final match being against Canary, and the entire world seemingly rooting for him, it must have felt like a hollow victory. That is why he wasn't sure whether to accept the gold medal or not. He is not a villain, but was worried that was how he was portrayed. Bakugo is trying harder than anyone in his pursuit to become the top hero. If the villains think they have a chance with him, then they are grossly mistaken. I can guarantee you that much. Bakugo let a grin spread across his face. Negative thoughts lasted to the wind. Or perhaps the still musky air of the bar him and Deku had been trapped in for the last few days. How about Canary, Izuku, Midoriya? The reporter persisted. With a group that is known to follow the anti-hero tendencies of the hero killer Stain, how do you know that he's still alive? We're doing our very best with the intel that we currently have available, Principal Nezu replied. I have no doubt that the police will break this case very soon and bring our missing pupils back, hopefully before anything can happen to them. Do you really think that's good enough? The reporter tutted. He's already been attacked and injured by the hero killer himself under the care of UA. How are you striving to protect students like him in the future? We are planning on increasing patrols around... The TV was shut off by the hands villain, Shigaraki, who turned back to him and leered under that freaky dismembered hand.
How strange. Now the heroes are the bad guys. So much criticism. But everyone makes a mistake or two, right? It's not like they're supposed to be perfect.
Once a hero receives payment to protect people, they aren't a real hero anymore,
The lizard added. He turned his gaze towards Deku.
Someone who strives for fame, glory, and money shouldn't be worthy of that title.
If you took off his gag, you'd find that's not what he's trying to do at all, Bakugo growled. He knew Deku well enough to understand that he didn't want all this attention for being a hero. That was just something he believed he had to put up with. When they were little, he just wanted to be like All Might, to save others. Bakugo wanted the same. He looked up to the pillar that the hero formed. He wanted to always come out on top. A hero who always wins, no matter what. Deku looked to him in some sort of surprise. Yeah, he hated him, even more recently. But now wasn't the time to deal with it. He was smart enough to know when a fight shouldn't be picked.
Oh yeah,
Shigaraki replied.
didn't the two of you go to the same middle school? How strange. You must have been there before our dear little Canary went mute, when he was still quirkless.
Deku's eyes lowered again, ashamed of what he once was. The pathetic loser that still somewhat remained inside of him.
Quirkless,
Repeated Shigaraki.
you were a lot like us, Canary. Shoved aside. Deemed useless. Isn't that what the name Deku means?
Deku. He flinched at that. Shigaraki got up and started to walk slowly towards him.
Kicked, beaten, bruised, told that you were worth nothing. So much so that suddenly you find you can't even speak anymore.
The villain almost laughed.
There are so many out there like you. We are like you. Even though we're different, everyone here has suffered. Because of people, rules, and heroes who try to hold us back. Did you ever want to be a hero before you had a quirk, Canary? Were you told it was impossible? Don't you want to make a change for those who are still stuck in that position?
He stood over him, his back turned to Bakugo. But for some reason, Deku wasn't cringing away this time. Maybe that was because he was stuck between the girl with the knives and the guy with the disintegration quirk. Maybe there was something else behind it.
And then you turned around and found you had a quirk.
Shigaraki exclaimed, turning around himself to pace across the room as he spoke.
Suddenly the whole world loves you. But before you had it, well, they just didn't give a damn. It's unfair. This whole society is unfair.
He paused, turning his head so one gleaming red eye stared back at Bakugo.
And what about you, Bakugo?
He tensed as the conversation was swerved back around to him.
Look at what the public thought of you.
He continued, gesturing to the blank TV screen.
They saw you as a villain, not the future hero you aspire to be.
He spent his whole life being called a villain, whilst you were called a hero. Well, you know what? They got it the wrong way around!
They were scared of you.
Well, you know what? They got it the wrong way around!
So, how about it?
He glared at the insane man, daring him to come an inch closer.
How about you join us? Both of you. Help us make it hit. We want society to start asking the same questions as us. That's when we'll know we've won. And you like winning, don't you, Bakugo?
He gritted his teeth. They were trying to recruit him. Recruit Deku! They really were nuts. He proved Bakugo's point seconds later.
Toga, undo Canary's gag.
Oh, okay. The psychopath exclaimed, eagerly reaching forwards to undo the knots on the fabric that kept Deku's voice muted. What? Are you crazy? One of the other villains hissed at Shigaraki, and Bakugo silently agreed. But it played in his favor, so he wasn't about to say anything about it.
We're trying to recruit them,
Shigaraki explained.
We might as well be a little more hospitable.
Toga peeled the cloth away from Deku's face, but he kept his mouth shut. The girl was still threateningly close.
Besides,
Shigaraki grinned.
I promised we'd speak again.
Bakugo had never thought he'd see that look on Deku. He snarled, baring his teeth at the villain, a shadow cast over his eyes by the matted mess that his hair had become.
But before we conclude whether you will join us or not,
Said Shigaraki,
why don't the two of you have a little chat?
Deku's expression didn't change. Bakugo just snarled despite his confusion.
Come now.
The villain continued whilst the others just watched on in obvious interest.
Have you spoken at all since the sports festival? No one could hear what you said to each other during your fight, but you'd certainly whacked each other up, hadn't you?
They got it the wrong way around! Shut your damn face! Bakugo growled. This is none of your business!
Oh, so there is something between you two.
He probably shouldn't have said that.
What do you think, Canary?
Silence fell between them all again, filled only by the sound of the villains shuffling to and fro. Their heavy breathing, the gentle noise of the portal man cleaning the glasses at the bar. Deku's voice was barely loud enough to be heard over that. I was quirkless and mute, he said, head still lowered, but his gleaming eyes were visible to Bakugo as he glared angrily across the room. I was mute because I was quirkless, and I was quirkless because I was mute. And there is no denying that all of that was your fault! Bakugo just stared, shoulders tense, heart beating fast in repressed panic. But that doesn't mean I hate you, he continued to whisper. You did wrong, and I hope that you've changed. However, what I know will never change is your drive to become a hero. Deku turned his head back to the villains. You were wrong taking him here. His voice was getting louder now, more confident, more sure. You won't sway him, and you won't sway me. There is more power in my voice than I could have ever anticipated. That is what I will use to make a difference in this world. We will never join you. Shigaraki hesitated. It clearly wasn't the response he was expecting. But then he seemed to make up his mind.
Your fault, eh, Bakugo?
Bakugo clenched his hands into fists the best he could in the metal cage they'd been confined within. Shigaraki sat back down on a bar stool and waved towards the scar-faced villain.
Dappy, undo his bindings.
What? He huffed. You know he'll just fight.
It's fine.
Shigaraki insisted in a similar way that he had when Deku's gag had been taken off.
Besides, he should be smart enough to know that he can't take all of us, especially when his friend's life is on the line, right?
Toga grinned and tightened her grip on Deku. It was not Dabi, but this twice guy who stepped forward to undo Bakugo's restraints.
Don't you feel let down by this heroic community of ours?
Shigaraki persisted to talk.
That they turn on you at the slightest indication that you don't fit exactly into their perfect mold. Join us and make your own rules. You'll always be victorious and we'll...
He didn't have the chance to finish that because with a loud bang and a sizzle of fire and smoke, Bakugo lashed out at the villain, sending that dismembered hand of Shigaraki's rolling across the floor. I'm done listening to your endless talking, he thundered. You'll never beat me, and I'll never join you. Shigaraki looked defeated, staring at that stupid hand like it was the only thing that mattered, his head hanging limp as he did so. The other villains were loudly discussing how much of a bad idea Bakugo's decision to attack had been, but before any of them could do anything, Shigaraki had retrieved the hand, placing it artfully back over his face. Then the dangerous man walked across the room and reached Deku's side before Bakugo had dared to make a second move. Toga skipped back to the bar, leaving Deku with Shigaraki as he disintegrated his bindings. It took mere moments for Deku to be pulled from his chair, stumbling into the center of the room, his jaw clenched shut, as Shigaraki had one hand around his throat and the other on the side of his face, touching the scars that the hero killer had left behind on his cheek.
The two of you are important pieces in my plan,
Shigaraki leered. Deku was breathing heavily, staring down at Shigaraki's dangerous fingertips with wide, terrified eyes as he tried to escape his grip. But it only became firmer with his struggles.
Compress. Put Bakugo back under with your quirk,
Shigaraki ordered, turning to the masked villain.
Master, lend me your power.
Bakugo didn't have time to acknowledge what that could have meant. He needed to escape. There was a door right behind him. But if he tried to run, Deku would suffer the consequences, and he would be the one blamed for it. Gotron! Go! Deku yelled. Shigaraki growled. Without hesitation, he gripped the side of Deku's face with all 5 fingers, allowing it to crack and splinter. He yelled out in pain, which was when Shigaraki stopped. Just a warning.
I knew you would never join me,
the villain told Deku as he continued to fight under his hold, those red eyes alight with mania.
But I thought I would give you the chance. Never mind, I can go with my original plan. You see, Canary is a rather interesting choice for a hero name. Did you know? Well, of course you do, with all the little facts you like to spout. That canaries would be used as nothing more than warnings in the depth of coal mines. When they stopped singing, it would mean they had been poisoned by a gas leak before the miners themselves. I wonder, if you stopped singing, do you think the heroes would realize the danger that we pose too?
And it was to Bakugo's horror that Shigaraki's hand returned to the cracks on Deku's jawline. He could do nothing but watch as it crumbled, as the skin turned to dust in the air and the villain's hand reached inside Deku's mouth, open wide as he let out an ear-piercing scream. Deku fell to the ground, released by Shigaraki. He was conscious, but he didn't move, only curling up in a ball, shuddering as he reached for the side of his face, hiding it from view. And Bakugo did nothing. He had done nothing to stop it. Nothing at all. Only stared, wide-eyed, as the villain wiped his hand on his shirt, leaving crimson red marks behind. Silence returned. A buzzing filled Bakugo's mind. It rung in his ears like the aftermath of one of his larger explosions, whilst the very world before him started to sway.
Knock, knock. Hello? I got a pizza delivery here.
What the heck? Bakugo tore his eyes away from Deku, staring at the door. The villains didn't have the time to investigate, though, because seconds later, a bang far bigger than the one Bakugo had caused filled the bar, and half the wall came toppling down as their savior came crashing through. Just a few seconds too late. Jiro stepped off the train to Gamina Ward. There was a certain excitement building in her. Canary was close. He had to be. Those villains are hiding somewhere in this city, Kirishima announced. Way too loudly. Just tell me where to go! Wait a second, Yaoyorozu, the voice of reason, exclaimed. From now on, we're going to need to be extremely careful. These criminals already know what we look like, remember?
We won't be able to scout effectively if we're recognizable,
Ida agreed, his hand hovering thoughtfully by his chin. So what should we do? Uraraka questioned, pulling at the hem of her shirt nervously. I have an idea. Although it is a bit old school. Yaoyorozu fidgeted, pointing towards a shop just down the street. Dirt cheap Don Quixote. Oh no, Shinso groaned. No way are you dragging me into this. I see where you're going. Wait, where are we going? Hiroshima asked in apparent confusion.
Yaoyorozu's suggesting we purchase some disguises as to achieve our goal of blending in,
Ida explained. You guys know I don't have any money, right? Yaoyorozu already had to get my train ticket. Rebecca muttered shamefully. Well, what else can we do? Todoroki retorted, folding his arms. Wherever the villains are isn't exactly going to be super crowded like this place, sighed Shinso. I guess we could just get some surgical masks and pull up our hoods. We blend in enough by looking like shady low-life thugs or something. A gang of teenagers wandering around in the back alleys.
Are you suggesting we pretend to be villains?
Ida exclaimed, clearly against the idea.
Yeah, don't worry, Ida. We all know you're good at that.
And Muraka sighed, thinking back to their first training exercise. Jiro almost chuckled at the thought of his method acting. She wasn't even close enough to listen, but from what she could see on the camera feed, it was pretty hilarious.
Not villains, delinquents,
Jiro contradicted. Ida wasn't impressed.
Isn't that just a synonym for...
Whatever, let's just go with it, Shinso insisted, marching ahead into the shop. I could just brainwash anyone who recognizes us anyway.
But,
Yaoyorozu trailed off.
Jiro just patted her on the shoulder. We can go shopping again another time, if you want.
She had a feeling that Yaoyorozu hadn't had the chance to hang out with friends like that before. She'd really enjoyed their trip to the mall, even if it was cut short. Jiro's thoughts of Shigaraki attacking Canary back then only spurred her to walk faster as they set their plan into action. They got a few odd looks from the cashier, as Yaoyorozu ended up buying everyone's disguises, but they must have gotten a few strange groups like them going through there, because the man didn't bother questioning them any further. It was a struggle to remove the hair gel from Kirishima's and Shinso's hair so they could actually manage to pull their hoods up over their heads. Other than that, the only other person who required more attention was Todoroki, who ended up purchasing a medical eye patch to conceal his scar. They didn't have the time to deal with makeup. Shinso had also refused to let them hang around when they spied the press conference being played on one of the billboards overlooking the main street. Although Jiro surely wasn't the only one shocked by Mr. Aizawa actually brushing his hair and wearing a suit and tie, appearing on television despite his clear aversion to the media. Wandering through the streets, they did catch a few glances, but no one stopped them or even tried to speak with them. Once they were far enough away from the lights of the bright city, they were able to let their guard down a little, but not for long.
Okay, this is the spot the tracker is broadcasting from,
Yaoyorozu whispered back to them, pulling out her surgical mask when it caught in her long, loose hair. So that's their hideout? Kirishima supposed.
Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. According to the tracking history, the villain hasn't left this location for the past day, but that's all we know,
she explained.
One villain is hiding here, but that could be it. They might have Bakugo and Canary somewhere else.
I don't like this,
Ida voiced.
If I think things are going to be the least bit dangerous, we're done. I won't hesitate to call the police either to make sure my friends are safe.
Well, Jiro replied, I'm the one here who's got a quirk for sneaking around, so I'll take the lead.
Unraveling her earphone jacks from her hoodie, she hurried forwards, closely followed by the others. There were still people around, so she had to be careful. At least it was easy enough to disguise the aux cords as hoodie strings, angling her body so passers-by wouldn't see that they were moving around, sensing every little vibration in the air. The sounds coming from that seemingly abandoned warehouse, however, weren't what Jiro had expected. It was eerily quiet. She needed to get closer. That was why she ended up leading the group around the back of the building, squeezing through into the small gap between it and the one next door. Once in a secure position, Jiro indicated to the others to keep quiet by putting a finger to her lips. After a swift nod from them, she slammed her earphone jacks into the wall, holding her hands over her ears in an attempt to block out any other sounds. She frowned. What is it? Shinso questioned.
All I can hear is this weird bubbling noise, she explained, straining to listen closer, but she had been right. There was no other sign of life within the warehouse. Are you sure we're in the right place? Positive, Yaoyorozu nodded. Hey, wait a second. Jiro frowned, pulling her jacks from the wall and turning them back to the right. I hear something else over...
And suddenly a great white truck was raised from the ground. Watch out! She cried, and the others hurried as far away as they could before a giant purple-clad foot came crashing down, the car along with it.
smashing the warehouse to smithereens. They yelled as a great gust of wind filled with rocks and debris overcame them. It took a few minutes before they dared to emerge from behind the wall that separated them from the warehouse. Uraraka made herself and Jiro float, allowing them to reach up and peer over the barricade. Jiro gasped. "It's the heroes!" she whispered down to them eagerly. "Melt Lady? Gang Orca? Wow, even Bastionist!" Uraraka explained excitedly. "And look! There's Tiger! He's with Ragdoll! They found her!"
Then the heroes were far more prepared than we thought.
Ida realized, a great grin splitting across his face as he pulled off his surgical mask.
"But there are so many Nomu there," Jiro gaped. "And that bubbling noise I heard, they were in tanks?" "Maybe that's why my tracker took us here," Yaoyorozu supposed. "It was on a Nomu." As the others nervously conversed about what this could possibly mean, Jiro turned her attention back to the response team of heroes. They were talking about
All Might?
"Hey, guys!" said Jiro, grasping their attention again. "They said All Might was somewhere else. Maybe he's found Canary and Bakugo!"
"This is great!" Kirishima said excitedly. "They're gonna be okay!"
"Then let's get back home as quickly as we can," Yaoyorozu suggested eagerly as she too pulled off her disguise.
Yes, at least we won't have to explain ourselves.
Ida nodded as he followed Yaoyorozu down the narrow alleyway away from the scene. Shinso was the only one who was hesitant. He waited as Uraraka reached up to help pull Jiro back to the ground. But she was on high alert, like she had been in the attack on the summer camp. Every sound reached her ears, including that of the shuffle of a stranger's feet, back in the shadows of the ruined warehouse. "Wait," she said, turning back to the sight of the heroes restraining the remaining Nomu.
"I'm sorry, Tiger, but Ragdoll's quirk was so useful. I just had to take it."
"There's someone else there," Jiro's voice ducking back down below the wall to join the others as Uraraka released her quirk.
"A villain," Todoroki frowned.
"I don't know. Maybe."
Since my body was mostly destroyed, I haven't been able to stock up on quirks."
Jiro heard the heroes make their move against the newcomer. Everyone heard what came next.
Stupid freaking idiot!
Bakugo just wanted to scream at him! Surely he could have gotten out of Shigaraki's grip, sung something, anything! He just froze up with big frightened eyes, just like he always used to in middle school when he was confronted about anything! Now he lay on the floor curled up and cradling his jaw. Bakugo didn't have time to lash out at the villains again. He supposed the pros were doing a good enough job at that. He needed to be a hero himself. What needed doing right now? Oh yeah. Right. He hated this bit. The aftermath part. It was pretty bad in class, with Raccoon Eyes wailing about having a broken leg with melodramatic acting skills. It was worse when someone was actually lying in a pool of their own blood. No one to fight. Nothing else to do but try his best to help someone else fight off the callings of, well, death. But he hoped it wouldn't come to that. Bakugo hurried to Deku's side, crouching down carefully where the floor was still remotely clean. He put his hand on Deku's shoulder and shook him gently, unsure if he was still conscious or not. He needed to get into the recovery position if he wasn't. "Hey, Deku! Deku, you bastard!" "Ah, shoot!" He tilted him over a little, red eyes meeting watery green, unfocused and distant, and the contrasting color that oozed from the side of his face. Just take a deep breath, okay?" Bakugo said, unsure of what else he could possibly do. "The heroes are here. Freaking All Might! You'd always loved All Might! Come on, go!" But he still didn't respond. Nothing but a whimper could be urged from him.
"Ya right there, kid?"
It was the old man in the white and yellow hero costume that approached Deku first. He nodded towards Bakugo, who took a step away from the pair. Bakugo's hands were red.
"You must have been scared!"
All Might exclaimed when he gave Bakugo a pat on the back, which ended up nearly knocking the wind out of him.
"But you stayed strong! I'm sorry. You're safe now, young man."
Bakugo just ground his teeth together in frustration, staring at the color which marred his fingertips. He didn't feel safe, and he was scared. Not that he'd ever admitted.
The villains themselves weren't the worst of it. It was mainly the sight of Deku, more broken than he'd ever been, lying there before him.
Toshinori, we have a problem.
The old man suddenly announced, causing All Might's undying smile to waver. They all looked back to Deku. He'd been sick on the floor. Bakugo couldn't bear to look at it any longer. But Deku had now finally gotten to his feet, his hands still covering the side of his face as his manic eyes flicked across the bar, backing away slowly from not only the villains, but the heroes too. He walked right into Bakugo. Deku's gaze zeroed in on him for barely a second before he panicky scurried away from him, backing right into the wall beneath the ripped All Might poster and sinking back to the ground, his body racking with his sobs.
What did you do?
All Might cried, his furious gaze turning back to Shigaraki, who was bound within Kamui Wood's lacquer chain prison. The villain struggled against his binds, pulling himself to an upright position as he let out a crazed laugh.
I am the poison that silences the Canary,
he announced, eyes wild under the hand that covered most of his face.
That which disturbs the peace. Everything that you stand for. You created a garbage society by lifting up such ridiculous ideals. That's why I hate you. Why I started gathering people to my cause. Because you smile so thoughtlessly, and everyone else thinks they can do the same. I will show the world the truth. And the first step is bringing the pillar, that which holds society up, to the ground. Canary showed me that. We had a nice little talk at the ball. But now he'll never speak again.
The look on Deku's face was pure, unadulterated horror. It was mirrored across many in that moment, Bakugo included.
Just you wait,
Shigaraki continued.
The game is still mine. Where's your boss hiding, Shigaraki?
The older hero demanded, leaving Deku's side only to shout at the villain.
Just know that all this is your fault, he yelled. I hate you!
And that was when it happened. Despite the warp villain's unconsciousness, gray, sludging portals appeared in thin air, slopping all over the bar and bringing with it numerous Nomu. Bakugo heard a desperate cry from across the room, and his gaze rested upon Deku once more. The same gray gung was now pouring from his face, muffling his screams as he disappeared.
Young Midoriya!
All Might cried, staring uselessly at where Deku had vanished. Bakugo followed soon after, gagging on the foreign substance as it crept up his throat and spilling out into the air, engulfing him in seconds. All he could think about as the world vanished before him was that time all those months ago when Deku had rushed to his rescue, pulling pointlessly at the sludge villain's vicious body to try and save Bakugo as he slowly suffocated there. He closed his eyes and let the cork take him, wondering for a moment if that would be the end. Shinso had his back against the broken wall, his hand covering his mouth in a feeble attempt to hold back the bile. The others were doing the same. That villain. He'd obliterated his surroundings in seconds. Merely the flick of his wrist had been enough to render every single hero unconscious, excluding Best Genius, of course. But Shiro was now unsure if he'd ever be conscious again. But then heavy, heaving coughs filled Shinso's ears.
Ah! What the hell?
Shinso's eyes widened at the sound of Bakugo's voice. There was clearly someone else there, too, coughing and retching far louder than Bakugo had been. Against his better judgment, Shinso cautiously forced his stiff muscles, still partially frozen with fear, to allow him to peer around the edge of the wall. The villains were arriving in bursts of black gung, dripping onto the floor and vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. But within the circle of gagging villains were two very familiar figures, and there, with red on the cheek he held tentatively in his right hand, was Midoriya. He hadn't been listening to whatever this master villain was saying to Shigaraki. There was only one thing present in Shinso's mind's eye at that moment. Midoriya was right there, 6 or 7 meters away from him, being pulled roughly to his feet by Bakugo. And he was hurt. Shinso had to get to him. But how? The villains clearly hadn't noticed they were present, or else they wouldn't have been speaking so freely. If he revealed himself now, Shinso could put all of the others in danger. And could he activate his quirk on time? The villains at the summer camp hadn't spoken to him, clearly because they had sufficient knowledge of what his quirk could do ever since the sports festival. But he had to try. He had to help Midoriya. If not, could he call himself a hero at all? But then Ida's hands reached over to him, holding Jiro against the wall and gripping Shinso's side, preventing him from taking a step further out of their hiding place. Over on the other end of the group, it was Yaoyorozu who gripped Uraraka's and Todoroki's arms. Neither of them would be letting them take action. So what now? There you are. Shinso's eyes widened. Had the boss villain found them? Had he... There was a gush of wind and a great clashing of forces when All Might leapt down from the sky. I'll have you return my students, all for one! Have you come to kill me a second time, All Might? Ida and Yaoyorozu had released them now. They were too preoccupied on trying to stay on their own 2 feet as the power that the 2 titans radiated sent great gusts of air across the ruined landscape. Through a crack in the wall, Shinso still had his eye on Midoriya. Like the rest of the villains, and Bakugo too, he'd been tossed aside by the blow. Now, with his hands gripping onto the rubble in hopes of keeping him in place, his injury was left on full display. And Shinso could see a flash of his teeth through the side of his face. Shinso had only just recovered from the villains' All For One's first attack before a second rippled through the atmosphere, sending All Might crashing through the city off into the distance. All Might! Shinso heard Bakugo cry. Don't you worry, All For One sighed. It will take more than that to kill him. The villain turned back to Shigaraki. Get off the battlefield, Tomura, and take the children with you. Shinso looked away from the scene, turning back to Jiro as All For One somehow forcefully activated the quirk of the unconscious portal villain he'd seen back at the summer camp. We have to do something, Shinso whispered to the girl. Anything, before they get away. Jiro blinked at him for a second, barely overcoming the shock of the whole situation. She turned back to the battlefield and Shinso followed his gaze. All Might had already returned and had begun to battle against All For One once more. They were keeping each other occupied. Meanwhile, the League of Villains had surrounded Bakugo and Midoriya. But whilst Bakugo feigned a smile and let the firepower of his quirk crackle and pop in his palms, ready to fight, Midoriya could do nothing but cower beside him, covering his jaw with his hands and quivering. It was clear the injury was bad enough to hinder his singing, and therefore his quirk. But now wasn't the time to think of what that might possibly mean for his friend. Right now, Shinso needed to focus on thinking up a way to get him out of there. Don't let that magician lay her finger on you, Deku! Bakugo yelled, using an explosion to blast the villain in question out of his radius. Midoriya had given up protecting his fragile jawline, but fortunately for him, he didn't need his quirk to put up a good fight, and there had always been one thing Midoriya excelled at: dodging. So as that psychopathic blonde girl waved a knife at him, enthusing about the volume of blood that persisted to trickle from his cheek, he was ducking and rolling, somersaulting and evading the attacks of every villain that attempted to reach him. But it was 6 against 2. They wouldn't be able to hold up for long. Not even All Might could lend a hand because of the apparent strength of the villain he was locked in combat with. There had to be a way to get to him. An opening. A mere second that would give them the chance to jump in action. He looked back to the others. What powers did they have access to? What advantages and disadvantages did they bring with them? How could they do this without engaging in combat? Come on, think! What would Midoriya do? Shinso needed to think like a hero. Midoriya tried to bite through the pain, but the clenching of his jaw only made matters worse. The adrenaline rushing through his veins as he dodged, flipped, twisted, and turned was the only fuel that kept him going. It numbed the throbbing in his mouth the best it could, but even that couldn't completely dull the excruciating firing of his nerves. Every twitch of muscle around the injury only made things worse. But now wasn't the time to back down. He had to use his quirk. There was only so much he could do without it. It was 6 versus 2. Him and Kachan, that was. However, Kachan was so busy protecting himself that there wasn't much he could do for Midoriya. Years of practice, however, allowed him to be one step figuratively and metaphorically, ahead of the game as he continued to evade his attackers.
Come on, Canary! Toga cried, her eyes wide and fanged grins spreading from ear to ear. Let me cut you a little more. You're so pretty. So pretty.
Maniac.
There was a bang behind him. Those years of experience flashed momentarily before Midoriya's eyes as he pivoted and swung at a fist, missing Kachan's face by inches.
Watch it!
He yelled, sending another of his blasts at the approaching villains. Kachan leapt away from him again, clearly keen to keep his distance after that. Midoriya almost opened his mouth to apologize, suggest sticking together the best they could. But a twang of pain told him otherwise. Perhaps he could push through, sing something. Mr. Aizawa had given them permission to fight at the summer camp. Technically, they were still able to. Kachan had told the villains so only moments before. That was why he was using his quirk so liberally now. But what about Midoriya? What could he use in this situation? A sleeping song? That would probably be best. If he could just hold out, force himself through the pain, and sing the lyrics he needed, he might even be able to knock out the villain that All Might was fighting. Yeah, that was it. All he had to do was sing. He dug his nails deep into the skin of his palms in a desperate attempt to distract himself as he opened his mouth, the intact skin tugging painfully on the new hole in his cheek, in place of the scars that Stain had left behind. And that was when he realized the words wouldn't come out. Not because of the mental barriers. No, he had learned how to climb those, break right through them from time to time. This barrier was more physical. He remembered now. As the shock was slowly fading, he realized what Shigaraki had done. His tongue. Most of it was gone. As his eyes widened, breath quickening, as the horrifying truth bared its teeth, he stumbled. The silver of Toga's blade was at his neck in seconds. Yay! She cried gleefully, the sharp edge of her knife digging into the tender skin. Come with me, Canary. He pulled at her arm, trying to get her away from him. It didn't work for long because that larger villain, Magne, was now at him too, tugging on his wrist and pulling him towards the portal open above the purple villain's fallen form. But he wasn't the only one prone to a lapse in concentration. That was to be expected when a giant column of ice erupts seemingly from nowhere, towering above their heads. From where it originated, 3 figures burst through the ruined stone wall. A redhead with the ability to perform such a feat at the front, positioned as though they were competing in the cavalry battle of the sports festival. At his sides was a pink-cheeked girl wearing a pair of shiny new rollerblades, practically floating above the ground as she skidded alongside them, as the third and final member of the group propelled them forwards with his engine-boosted legs. Kirishima, Uraraka, and Ida. They charged up the ice, most likely formed by Todoroki, and leapt high into the air, using it almost like a ramp. It was Kirishima who reached out, crying out for them to reach back. Midoriya managed to slip past the villain's grip. He opened his mouth to sing, desperate for his familiar green wings to burst from his back. But the sounds that came forth held no meaning, no power. Deku! Bakugo yelled as Midoriya was once again captured by the same 2 villains, being dragged closer and closer to the swirling violet vortex. Kirishima was fading from view. They didn't have much more time. Midoriya turned to Bakugo and he screamed. Whether or not it sounded right, it got the message across. Go! There was a flash of orange and white light, a trail of black smoke, and Kachan leapt into the night sky, silhouetted against the luminescent moon as he grasped the hand of his friend. He gazed back for the moments in which he could, a hopelessness in his eyes that Midoriya had never thought he'd see. And they were gone. The villains briefly discussed pursuing them using Magne's quirk, but with Midoriya's presence there was no need. A few had been rendered unconscious back at the bar. Several had also been attacked by the older hero and now lay on the rubble motionless. But those who remained knew that they still had one of their captives. And even Midoriya knew there was no possible way he could escape now. Toga stuck to his side like glue, her blade refusing to budge. Magne was dragging some of the other villains.
including the masked magician, towards the portal. But she wasn't needed to restrain Midoriya. Even as Shigaraki yelled towards his master, begging him not to send him away, the lizard-like villain aided Toga in her attempts to get Midoriya closer and closer to their exit. Midoriya weakened, slaking in their grip. He couldn't win. If he surrendered to them now, he would be taken away from the battlefield. All Might would no longer be forced to hold back. He could use his full power against the villain who persisted to destroy the city around them, putting more and more civilians in harm's way. The quicker this was over, the better it would be for everyone. So he closed his eyes and let his body be dragged backwards.
Canary!
He opened them again, glancing around frantically, desperate to find the owner of the voice, and his gaze finally settled on a group of familiar faces in the shadows of a devastated warehouse. Shinso. It was Shinso. Tears were streaming down his face as he yelled Midoriya's name. He was held back by an equally distraught Jiro, Todoroki, and even Yorozu, someone Midoriya had barely interacted with before. Yet they were all here. He pushed back against the villains, a new spark of hope igniting within him. But it was quickly snuffed out. They shouldn't be here. They could be hurt. He shook his head, not resisting the lump rising in the back of his throat as he mouthed the same message he'd yelled to Kachan to his remaining group of friends. Go. Please, go. Midoriya's gaze did not leave that of his friends as he was taken away from them once more.
Midoriya, no!
He let his eyes close and succumb to the darkness, happy to leave the pain of his consciousness behind. It was in that moment, with a heavy heart, Midoriya realized that there was a good chance that he would never see those faces again.